Good evening, everybody. And Ambassador Michael Mann, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Israel. And it's a pleasure to have you with us here today. You have come in a very crucial time for Israel-EU relationship. I know that has been probably said many years, but I think this time is especially crucial, not only for Israel-EU relation, but also for Israeli-Palestinian conflict and for the region as a whole. Following October 7, Europe stood by Israel in great solidarity. But what Israel did in Gaza in the past year, especially withholding humanitarian assistance for months from entering Gaza, have tested EU-Israeli relationship like never before. For the first time, the 27 foreign ministers of the EU member states decided to review the relations, and Brussels prepared a list of steps the EU can inflict on Israel. So that's a first. Mitvim's public opinion poll, the foreign policy index that you've heard about, in August found that 67% of Israelis see the EU as an adversary, and only 14% of Israelis see it as a friend. And these are the worst results that we had since we began to ask this question in 2018. So first, I have two questions. First, do you feel that the EU's policy towards Israel is well understood here by the Israeli public? And second, how do you see the EU relationship with Israel evolving today following the ceasefire? And are we witnessing a reset of the relations towards sort of business as usual, or is mistrust still the dominant feature that is shaping EU-Israeli ties, especially that in October, the Foreign Affairs Council decided to keep the steps that are intended towards Israel and not to take them off the table?
Thanks very much, Maya. That was lots of questions. First of all, it's very nice to be here. Thanks very much for asking me. I've been in the job for 2.5 months, but I was dealing with the issues before, but it's somehow very different to be doing it from Israel. You get a much better appreciation of what it's really all about. In terms of the European Union's relationship with Israel, I think, there is a basic misunderstanding, I think. We have to remember, I think, the message that I'm always trying to pass is that the European Union is historically and is still a great friend of Israel. That's the first thing that we must never forget. We have had growing difficulties in our political relationship. There's always been very close relationship in trade, in research, in culture, people-to-people contacts. But there's always been the Israel-Palestine issue in the background, which has always made things a bit challenging. But there's a new element now, because as you mentioned, for the first time, we have proposed measures against Israel. The reason that was done was because we felt that we needed to try and pressure the Israeli government to try and change direction. You mentioned the blocking of humanitarian aid for 2 months. That made it really rather inevitable that we would have to find that there was, that Israel hadn't been in line with its obligations under the association agreement. And the fact that we've put measures on the table was a reaction to the fact that we felt, and there was a growing feeling amongst our member states, that the war in Gaza had really reached the point where what was happening was disproportional and wouldn't bring any more tangible benefits. It was something that had already been said by the Chief of Staff, in fact, of the IDF. So we were confronted with we felt the political need to put some pressure on Israel to try and get it to change direction. And let's be honest, the levers that we have are very limited. So the proposals, you all know, were to suspend the trade preferences for Israel, to suspend a very small part of the Horizon Agreement, to apply more sanctions against extremist settlers, as well as Hamas members, against 2 members of the government, but also to freeze a certain amount of bilateral cooperation. Now, these have not been adopted by the Council because we can't agree on that, but we've decided to leave the measures on the table because we still believe there are things that we want Israel to do We have seen, fortunately, an increase in the humanitarian aid reaching Gaza, but we still think more can be done. And you mentioned I'm arriving at a bad time. I'm also arriving at a good time because the Trump plan has happened. The fantastic news that the living hostages were released. We're now only 4 sets of remains of dead hostages to be freed. We don't know whether they will all be able to come home, but we very much hope that they can. But this advent of the Trump plan and the fact that there is a ceasefire gives me hope that the relationship can start moving in the right direction. We'll probably come on to how we can help the Trump plan later, but we certainly think we can make a contribution to that because the Trump plan does actually tick most of the boxes that the European Union wants to see in Gaza. But there are still things that we feel that Israel could be doing. I mentioned increasing humanitarian aid still further, making sure it gets through. But we also have outstanding issues with access to Gaza for international NGOs, for our own DG ECHO, for journalists to get into Gaza. There's the outstanding issue also of the clearance revenues that need to be paid to the Palestinian Authority. So we believe that we still need to apply pressure in the way that we can. But I know this sounds a bit trite, but we are doing this from the position of friendship. There's not much we can do in terms of leverage, but really we want to send a signal that we are friends with Israel, but that we have political pressure in our member countries, and we need to be able to put some pressure on Israel to try and move in the direction that we think is the right direction. I hope that was an answer to those questions. It was very long. I'm not sure if it was an answer.
Well, the EU is a friend of Israel, and you're still trying to put Israel in the right, I think, direction of shared values that were spoken here before, in the panel before us. So I'd like to turn to Gaza and the EU's role in the day after. And the EU has been engaged in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for decades. Despite the EU being nowadays the largest humanitarian donor in Gaza, the largest donor for the Palestinian Authority, also in the West Bank, the EU and Europe as a whole have been absent from key decision-making forums, especially in the past month in influencing the design of the 20-point plan of Trump. So this whole day after, it seems that the EU is a payer, you are paying a lot, but you are not a player, you are not at the decision-making table. And it still, seems that after so many decades of EU involvement and investment in the two-state solution, you are not so much designing the day after. So why is the EU, despite its financial and political investment in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in the Palestinian authorities, not part of Trump's day after plan? And second, what can be the EU's role in the day after in Gaza?
We're not part of the plan, perhaps, but as I said before, it does cover most of the areas that we always said. From the beginning of the war, we've always said that we need to be there the day after. It's a bit of a cliche, not just a payer, but also a player. You mentioned humanitarian aid. Just the European Union budget alone, we've made 550 million euros available for Gaza, plus what our member states have given. We are the principal financiers of the Palestinian Authority. But there's so much more that I think we can do. We had a high-level delegation from Brussels here last week. No, it was even this week, so it's been a long week. This week. And we were down at the CMCC, the Civil Military Coordination Center down in Kiryat Gat. And we were pretty impressed by what we saw. I mean, the amazing speed at which this was put together. It's a military operation to put it together. Within 2 days, this center had been set up. And so that was the military side. But I think what needs to grow now is the civilian side of this. The big question mark that is still there is, of course, the Security Council resolution, what it will look like and what the stabilization force will look like. But that aside, there are so many things that we can do as the European Union. And the message we got was the train has left the station, is leaving the station, but we still want people to get on board this train. If you can come forward quickly with concrete measures, concrete proposals for ways in which you can help. We need your expertise because, some of the people involved in CNCC are new to this area. So, the assistance to the Palestinian Authority now is linked to them reforming. This is a big issue because at the moment, the Palestinians aren't really in the discussions at the CMCC about the future of Gaza. So if we can leverage our assistance to the Palestinians to persuade them to finally reform the Palestinian Authority in a meaningful way, and for the first time our aid is actually linked to reforms, then that's a big help. We mentioned before humanitarian aid. We will continue to be a major humanitarian partner. There was some question about the role of the UN and the role of international NGOs in the distribution of aid. We have, I think, won the argument that that has to be part of the equation. But beyond that, there are things we can also do in Gaza. We will definitely be a major part of the reconstruction effort. Again, we can't pick up the bill ourselves, but we can contribute, and we've just set up a Palestine donor group that will have its first meeting in Brussels next week. Even before October the 7th, the European Union was doing a lot of infrastructure work in Gaza on desalination, on gas for Gaza. We can surely go back to helping to reconstruct the infrastructure. Of course, we have our two missions here, which is already training police in the West Bank. That can almost certainly be extended so that we can help to train the future police force for Gaza. Our border assistance mission at Rafah, that has already shown its worth during the first ceasefire, and we're waiting for the chance to get that going again and perhaps to expand it. And then there are other things we do, our support for civil society. I mean, all of these things are mentioned in the Trump plan. Civil society is mentioned, interfaith dialogue is mentioned. So we have expertise, demining. So, we weren't part of the plan, no, but whoever wrote the plan clearly had in the back of his mind or her mind things that we are interested in. So, as I say, it's all there. Some of it's explained rather vaguely, but there is a political horizon for Palestinian governance there, a future role for the Palestinian Authority. And these are all things that we can help with, and we're optimistic that we can get in there quickly and we can put our imprint on the implementation of the Trump plan.
And if I can tell the audience, the EU has actually signed with the Palestinian Authority a letter of intent containing 8 areas of reforms. 2 of them are main concern for Israel. One is how we call it de-radicalization of the educational system, and the second one is stopping payment for prisoners and moving to a general social security system, which I think has not, there you don't see the needed progress. And I think there's a lot of trust that needs to be built between Israel and how it views the EU in implementing or pushing the Palestinians to implement those reforms. But we'll see how that goes. Our time is almost up, so last question. The EU remains the most consistent supporter of the two-state solution, yet de facto annexation of the West Bank is taking place on speeds under this government and under violent settlers who are driving Palestinians away in Area C, or from Area C, from villagers in Area C. So what more can the EU do to stop de facto annexation and to persuade Israelis that a viable two-state framework serves their long-term interests?
A lot of the answer to that question I think I've touched on before, in that we are, and you mentioned it as well, we are conditioning our support to the Palestinian Authority. We have a program of 1.6 billion euros over the next 3 years, 25, 26, 27, but it's for the first time strictly conditioned to them fulfilling these reforms. As you say, there's skepticism in the Israeli government about the reform of so-called pay for slay. There have been delays which are very unfortunate, but there is no doubt at all that the Palestinian Authority is serious about doing this, because unless we can persuade the Palestinians and the international community can persuade the Palestinians to make these reforms meaningful, they're unlikely to be able to be at the table. So that's the first thing we can do. We are also pushing very hard the Israeli government to make available the money that they owe to the Palestinians, the clearance revenues, because we can't finance the PA single-handedly. There are other financial issues in the West Bank, this corresponding banking system whereby the money is transferred via Israeli banks to the Palestinians. There's much diplomatic pressure we can put on Israel to help that. There's also, of course, the sanctions that we've put on the extremist settlers. We do have sanctions against 8 different individuals and organizations. There's more on the table. Unfortunately, we haven't managed to get consensus in the European Union on that yet, but that is certainly something that we will be doing to try and put pressure on. We're glad to see that the American government and the Emirati government did intervene when there was talk of discussions in cabinet about further annexation. So, it's partly making the Palestinians win the trust of the international community, where we can very much have a positive role. It's applying pressure on illegal acts, and it's working with our partners, I think. And I think also, we need to engage as much as possible the Arab partners as well to bring influence to bear both on the Israeli side but also on the Palestinian side. So, the situation in the West Bank is desperate. There is a lot of violence, but we need to try and strengthen support for legitimate Palestinian leadership to try and get a grip on that situation and persuade the Israeli government. I think that it's in their interest that the PA doesn't collapse. And I think the argument for the Americans has been one that annexation should not happen, even if de facto the events on the ground are pretty grim.
Indeed, and I think one thing that is of major concern is the planning of building at E1 area. And I was wondering if the EU is intending to have any sort of red line that it could actually impose,
I think talk of red lines is always a bit dangerous. I mean, we have a certain amount of leverage over Israel, but not the sort of leverage that the Americans have, for example. So I think we can focus on the areas where we're strong, trying to, persuade the Palestinians of the value of getting better, and trying to persuade the Israelis of the genuineness of the reform efforts in the Palestinian Authority. And we do have to work together with the Americans. And, whatever people may say about Donald Trump, the Trump plan ticks the boxes, and they are very determined about making it work. And we can help with that. And they have been firm on the issue of annexation as well. So I think, although, it's fairly grim, I think one has to say that we're in a positive place at the moment, and we should build on that positivity.
Indeed, so I thank you very much for coming. And I hope together, Israelis and Europeans, we can build hope by choosing the diplomatic path. Thank you.